Hi there, this is Tracy Kiernan, and I'm going to show you how to paint a jacaranda tree. This is an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and I'm going to already load my palette with the colors light blue permanent and titanium white. I'm going to use the 3/4 inch wash brush. You see me loading my brush with the water, and I'm going to apply the water to the top of the canvas. Applying a small layer of water to the canvas first helps to get the paint flowing, especially if we have a large area to fill in. Then I'm going to load my brush in the blue and the white, about 50-50 of both the colors. Start at the top of the canvas and paint left and right strokes using the full width of the brush. We're doing a sort of ombre effect with the blue, and we want the blue to eventually fade to a very almost a white color as we go down the canvas. So we're doing full width of the brush, left and right strokes. The blue is about 50-50 at the top with the white and the blue. It's going to get lighter as we work our way down and add more white to the brush. So we're basically blending it on the canvas. It doesn't have to be a perfect blend. There can be some white streaks in the sky. That's okay. But essentially we want to just keep adding more white as we go down. Now, as to how far you're going down, it's about a third of the canvas, so you can kind of, if you want to mark that with a ruler, you can, but I just kind of eyeballed it. So just imagine an imaginary horizon line at about 1/3 down the canvas. That's where I want to stop. Okay. And then we can go back and add, we don't want this to be very thick. It's still a pretty thin layer, but I'm adding kind of a second layer of paint in there of the cerulean or the light blue permanent at the top and a little bit more white at the bottom. But if you keep working it and adding more, it's going to end up being the same exact color. So don't overwork the colors. Okay. So when you're done with the sky, you could go ahead and paint the sides. So you see me doing that here. I'm using just the full width of the brush and the light blue permanent to paint the side of the canvas. And I did the top side as well as the left side. And the right side. And then I stopped where I stopped at my horizon line. So actually you can add a little bit of white in there if you want that color to be kind of the same. Okay, so we're done with the sky portion. Completely rinse that brush and load your palette with Payne's Gray. We do not need to let this dry a bit. In fact, it kind of helps that this sky is still kind of wet, so our blue will blend in just a little bit with that. But rinse your brush off and load just a tiny bit of Payne's Gray and a lot of white. We want to make a very light gray. So you saw me load just like a tiny corner of that Payne's Gray on my brush, and then I grabbed a big glop of white, blended it on my palette, and this is a light gray color. I'm going to use the tip of my brush to paint this mountain line, and notice where the mountain line is. It starts above the horizon line. So where you painted the sky, where you went all the way down, you're going to start your mountain line above that, and then you're going to fill it in. So I'm filling in this mountain about 3/4 inches down, so about the width of my brush, and I'm just filling in this mountain with that light gray color. If you look at the sample of the painting we're doing, there's about 5 layers of mountains we're going to do, and each mountain layer, as we work our way down the canvas, is going to be a darker gray. So we're going to be mixing darker grays as we go along. But right now, this is our lightest mountain. It's our furthest mountain, and it goes down about 3/4 inches. And I'm going to show you another trick that I like to do with these mountains. I like to do some wet on wet blending with the mountains and add white at the base of each mountain. So I went ahead and I reloaded my, added some fresh white on my palette. Didn't rinse my brush off, just grabbed the white, and I'm just going to add white to the base of that mountain and blend it back up. And it should blend nicely, especially because that gray is still wet. So this is wet on wet blending, just like what we did with the sky when we did the blue and we blended it with the white. It's the same exact thing, only it's transitioning to white. We don't want it to really transition to a pure white. It just turns to an even lighter gray. So you can see what happens there. It kind of gives you that misty mountain look where the mountain is darker at the top and it gets very light on the base. So next we're going to do our next layer of mountain, and we want to mix a gray that is slightly darker than the first one. So I did I did 1 drop the first time, so maybe 2 drops of gray this time, and blend it on your palette. You don't want it to get too dark yet. It's still kind of a medium gray. So use the tip of your brush, test it out to see if it's still a little darker than the first layer. And I'm going to paint my next mountain line using the tip of the brush. And notice right here, this peak right here went higher than the one behind it. That gives it kind of a more natural look that the mountains are different heights. And so I'm going to fill it in about 3/4 inches, pretty much using the width of my brush. Fill it in solid with that gray color that we made. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to load my brush with some white. I'm going to do wet on wet blending to let that white blend in with the gray so that it gives you the look of depth of the mountain is darker at the top and it fades down lighter towards the base of it. So you can already see what's happening here with the different shades of gray that we're creating. Okay, so the next step, you could guess what we're going to do next. We're going to make another gray. So I'm just grabbing another little probably 2 more drops of gray, adding it to that color that's already on my palette. Adding some more white in there if you need to, because this is not our darkest gray. It's still, it needs to be darker than the previous one, but not too dark. Okay, so I'm going to use the tip of my brush. I'm going to paint a mountain line. So this is the top of the mountain line. And again, to make it look more natural, don't copy the previous mountain line, make a different sort of path. You can even make a peak that's higher than the mountain before it. You can dip down lower if you want. Okay, and then fill it in about 3/4 inches using the width of your brush. So fill it in solid with that color. And then do your white to do your wet on wet blending so that the white blends back up into the gray that you created. And this gives a really pretty effect for painting layers of mountains. So adding some more white in there to get that to blend back up. And you can see how far down I am with the canvas right now. There's probably about 3/4 inches left on the bottom, but I'm still going to do another layer of mountain after this. So I don't want to paint all the way down yet. Okay. Also, having a napkin close by helps, because sometimes when you're doing all this loading of your brush and wet on wet blending, your brush gets overloaded with paint, and it's better to just kind of wipe it off with a paper towel than it is to get the water on it and rinse it off. So that's what I do. I wipe my brush off with the paper towel when it gets overloaded. Okay, so now we have to go even darker. We want to add some more gray to the previous gray that we have already on our palette. We want to use the tip of our brush to draw our mountain line. And at this point, I'm already all the way down to the canvas. So I'm going to paint this land area all the way down, and this is still not pure Payne's gray. So it's Payne's gray with a little bit of white in it. And I'll show you why that's important here in a second. So here is my 4th mountain line, and it's pretty dark, but it still has a little bit of white in there. And I'm not going to do the white thing. I'm not going to add white to the base of this. I'm going to keep that simple here. I didn't find it necessary to add white to the base of this layer of mountain. And maybe I'll have this peak go up a little bit over here on the right. Okay. When you are done with this 4th mountain layer, you're going to completely rinse your brush. I'm going to do the touch that up here just a little bit. But you're going to completely rinse all of that off your brush, because we want to get all that white, any white that's still on our brush, to get that all off, because our final land where our tree is going to be growing on is going to be pure Payne's gray. And you can see how dark that is without any white in there. That is our pure form of Payne's gray. It's a very, very dark color, and that line is very low in the canvas. It can overlap. You can go a little bit higher than the land before it if you need it to. If you want it to look more like a hill, you can do that. But this is the base of where our jacaranda tree is growing on. And I'm just going to go ahead and take that Payne's gray, and I'm going to paint the rest of the bottom of the canvas just to get that going through. And you can see how pretty those mountains look from the angle that I'm holding the canvas. I love the effect, and it's so simple. Just it's a little bit of practice mixing all those grays, but once you get the hang of it, it's such a simple technique that you can do in your landscape paintings if you like the look of all the different layers of mountains in the distance. Okay, and then as far as the sides, I'm just going to paint them one shade of gray. I'm not going to go in there and really do the detail on the side of that canvas there. Okay. You will need to take a break or get your hairdryer to let your painting dry, because the next step is going to be drawing our tree in. I also loaded my palette with raw umber and some fresh Payne's gray. And I'm going to use my 12 bright brush to paint the tree. Okay, get yourself a piece of white chalk and draw the tree. So the base of my tree is about 2 finger widths, and so that's the stump of the tree. So I'm going to draw the sort of curved lines that go down, and you see a little bit of the root showing through on the bottom. And my tree is going to branch off into 3 different large branches. So here's my first branch on the left. I know this is kind of hard to see with the chalk, so you can look at the example of how it's drawn in based on how it's painted, but you can see it's branched off into 3 branches. So these branches start out wide at the base. They get thinner towards the tip of the branch, and I'm kind of sketching in where I want these branches to also branch off. You do not need to get super detailed with the tree branches. The chalk is just to give you sort of a base of where you're going when you go to paint it in. So it's a very rough sketch of your tree. Okay. Load your palette with the raw umber and the Payne's gray. Use your 12 bright brush to paint your tree in. Your brown and black will mix together to make a very dark color, very dark brown color. And start at the base of the tree and fill it in using your brush. The bright brush is very handy because you can use the full width of the brush for your thicker parts of your branches, but then when you have to go thinner, like over here, you turn your brush on its side to use the tip of the brush so your stroke gets thinner because you're turning your brush. Another way to get thick and thin is to put more pressure on your brush. When you put more pressure on your branch is thicker, but when you release the pressure, that means you're holding your brush lighter. Your stroke gets naturally thinner. So you can kind of practice that brush control with the tree branches. And so I'm going to do this branch over here on the left. It's thick, so I'm using the full width of my brush here. It gets thin, so I can twist my brush on its side and then wisp it away to get to that point. Okay, and then I'm just going back in and doing so my branches have a little bit of a wobbly edge to it instead of a straight edge, so I'm just kind of adding a little bit of texture on the sides of those branches to make it look like they're not perfectly straight, smooth branches. They got kind of texture on the side. And then I'm going in and adding I guess another layer over here on the base of the tree. And then we want to get even more detailed up in the higher areas of the branches, something that maybe our bright brush won't be able to do. So I grabbed a 4 round brush, and this round brush has a nice tip to it. It's a little bit easier to control for these smaller areas. And I'm going in, and these are not lines that I drew with my chalk. These are lines that I am pretty much kind of doing on my own right now. So I'm making these branches stem off into little Y branches. And so Jacaranda trees have these very interesting branches that kind of go in all sorts of directions. But you can kind of observe the tree if you look at pictures. But I'm just kind of doing my own thing here and adding some more branches. So when I do the smaller branches, I think in terms of the branch splitting off into pairs, and obviously the higher you get, the thinner the branches are going to be. And then, but still the base of each branch that I paint is thicker. So I do more pressure on my round brush when I do the base of the branch. So right there, the base of that branch, you can tell that line is a little bit thicker than the rest of the line. I pressed hard, but then I released the pressure. When you release the pressure, you get a thinner stroke. So you start out kind of thick and hard, and then you release the pressure and it gets lighter. And then, so they're kind of going in different directions. And you can pretty much do this all you want until you feel satisfied with the amount of branches that you have. Keep in mind that if you look at the sample, the finished version, most of what we see is all the purple blossoms. So a lot of these branches are really going to be covered up anyway. Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit of an advanced thing. You don't have to do this, but if you want to try it, you can. Just wanted to experiment with adding some texture to my tree. So I added white to my palette, and I mixed white and the raw umber. And I guess there's still Payne's gray on my brush, so it's white, gray, and brown mixed together. And I'm adding some lighter areas of the tree, I guess on the base of these 2 branches that are on the left and the right. And I'm doing these short little strokes on the edge of the branches just to add a little bit of texture to the tree. It's mixing with the brown of the base of the tree already, so it's kind of mixing with the brown. If it gets too light, you could always go back and reload your brush in some more of the Payne's gray or the brown, just so that it could blend back out. So you don't want it to be too light, but just a few little subtle lighter areas of the tree gives it some more interest and makes it look a little bit more realistic. You can experiment with this. If you don't like the way it looks, you can always just go back over it and paint it back with the darker brown or darker Payne's gray color. And I did not do this texture thing up high in the branches because I knew that it was going to be covered up anyway with all those pretty purple blossoms. But I went kind of high with this branch over here on the right. Okay, and I'm not really paying attention to where my light source is supposed to be. I guess the light is behind the tree, so we wouldn't see the light in the middle part of the trunk, but only on the sides. Okay, and then a little bit of the root area is showing on the bottom, so I can kind of add some lighter areas or really define where my roots are at the base of the tree. And then going back in with a little bit more Payne's gray, adding the darker areas in there, just adding more to this texture of the tree. And then you could keep going with that. You could keep rendering that tree realistic until you're satisfied with it. Okay, so I think I'm going to move on to the next step. I'm going to get my brushes rinsed off and set to the side here. We are going to move on to what I like to call a scruffy brush. This is a brush that has the sort of natural feeling scratchy bristles. It's a very cheap brush set that I got a while back, and it has brushes that all look like this. But I only use these brushes when I want to do texture stuff because they're not really that great of acrylic painting brushes, I think, but they make excellent brushes if you want to do texture like these blossoms in the tree. So I'm going to load my palette with Brilliant Purple, which is kind of a light lavender purple, Ultramarine Blue, which is a blue that is kind of on the purple side of things for blue, and Titanium White, so purple, blue, and white. I'm going to load my scruffy brush in the purple, kind of dab it off to this side. You don't want to overload the brush, just enough on the tips so that when you dab it, it's going to create this texture. So I am dabbing this brush and creating little clusters of the Brilliant Purple. And if you look at a jacaranda tree, what it looks like in bloom, the blossoms are all in these sort of clusters. And we're not going to do the green leaves on this tree. We're just going to do the blossoms. So at the tips of all my branches, I'm just going to paint these clusters of the purple. And this is super simple and doesn't take too long because it goes pretty fast with this nice scruffy brush. Does the work for us. So I'm just going to add that to all the tips of my branches, and to make it look more natural, we don't want to kind of create a pattern here. We don't want all these clusters to all be the same shape and size. They're all different. Some are smaller clusters, some of the clusters are going kind of angular, a lot of them are going kind of horizontally, and so we don't want to generate any kind of pattern here, but we want it to look more natural. And I'm just going to keep going with this, keep adding clusters of this purple until I feel satisfied with the purple. And we will be adding the blue and the white in it as well. So when you're ready to move on to the next color, do not rinse your brush. load it in the ultramarine blue, dab it off to the side, and so your blue and ultramarine will mix together to make this sort of indigo color. And we're going to add more of that, the clusters, and I'm just going to go over where I applied my purple clusters, but I'm not going to cover my purple all the way. I want to still see the purple showing through, so it's kind of like another layer of the blue sort of showing through. And maybe I'll make some areas where I didn't do the purple, I'll just do the blue in its own area. Then I'm going to load my brush back in. I actually loaded it back in the purple this time, so I have kind of a purple and blue mix. And this video is going just a little bit fast because this takes quite a bit of time to do, but it is oh so relaxing. And because it's such a high success sort of thing, you're just dabbing your brush and it's creating this awesome, amazing texture, and it's so easy and so pretty at the same time. So you're just going to keep adding that, doing different combos of the purple and the blue. When your brush gets overloaded, use your paper towel to kind of wipe it off. So you see me loading the brush in the white. You just want to be careful with the white because it can take over. It's a really strong opaque color, and if we add too much white, it's going to look like snow in the tree, and that's the opposite of what we want. But the white just adds sort of highlight to the purple, another color dimension. And I'm not doing it everywhere, just a few spots in the kind of different areas of the clusters, and it helps, it blends with the color below it to create a different kind of color to look at. And so that's as far as I went. You can just keep going with this. Keep adding another layer of the blue and then adding another layer of the purple. I'm going to go ahead and do the blossoms on the base of the tree. So if you've ever seen a jacaranda tree in full bloom, there is a blanket of purple blossoms under the tree, and it's so pretty. So you got to make sure you do the blossoms at the base of the tree as well. So doing the same colors, same technique, pretty much on that base of that dark hill that we painted. The bottom part of the canvas got cut off from the camera here, but I will move it back here in just a second so you can see. There we go. So that's what I did with the bottom. And then I went back up and, of course, added more blossoms. So I don't think you can do too many blossoms with this, as long as your blossoms are not all of a sudden turning the same color. We don't want all the colors to mix together to one solid color. We want different variations of darks and lights, so it's more interesting to look at. And in fact, I purposely wanted more dark in the right side of the canvas. So if you look kind of closely, you see more of the ultramarine blue on the upper right and lower right than the rest of the tree. Okay. So your chalk lines, if you still have chalk lines, get a wet brush and sort of just erase them with the wet brush. So you can do that whenever you want. I did that real quick with one of my bright brushes. Just put water on it and I erased my chalk lines. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing some touch-ups with the base of the tree where I did maybe too much blossoms on the bottom, so I just touched that up a little bit right there on the base. Wanted some of the root showing through. Okay, and I also did these little grass silhouette lines. This is my 4-round brush with the Payne's Gray, and just something interesting to look at over here on the base. Some little pieces of grass sticking up to make it look like that's closer to the viewer. And so I'm just doing little clusters of lines, just dragging my paintbrush up a little bit. And then, of course, you can still go in and do more blossoms. So I did that again. I added more blossoms. More white blotches. I think the white really makes it look cool because it adds that sort of light contrast highlight in there, but just make sure you don't go overboard with the white. And then I mentioned I did a little bit more blue over on the right, lower right and upper right. And then what you can do is go in and paint some more branches that are showing through, especially if you ended up covering 90% of your branches. We still want to have it look like there are branches showing through. So I just going back with my bright brush, using the tip of it and using the tip of that brush to create some small lines showing through, so that we have a little bit more of a realistic effect in there. And then going back in with my round brush and adding a few blossoms at the base of the tree, and I am finished with my jacaranda tree. So this tutorial has come to its conclusion. I hope that you enjoyed painting a jacaranda tree and these lovely gray mountains. Thanks for watching.